Hey, greetings, everybody. It's your boy GleeCon here again. On our last episode, we kind of just had a shorter chapter about how Sylvanas' little brother has grown up. He's become a gifted prodigy of a musician. The people around want to see him. It was kind of a sweet little interlude. Unfortunately, it's probably leading up to some sadness. If we don't get invested a little bit, we can't be sad. All right, so stay a while and listen to that as we unfold here, Chapter 3 in Sylvanas. Sylvanas listened intently to the strains of lute music wafting into Southril's haven, picking up her pace. Was Lirath already mid-performance? But no, another instrument was joining in. She sagged in relief. Other musicians provided atmosphere for the gossip and flirtations going on. Her brother would be the center of attention when he performed. She scanned the crowd quickly, trying to locate anyone she might recognize who could give her away. Her gaze traveled over the sea of bright-colored clothing, glossy locks, and garish hats, until it landed on a white head of hair. "Lor'themar," Sylvanas murmured, and smoothly turned so she could put herself at the opposite end of the crowd. "Good day, my lady," came a voice. She started and turned to see a tall-robed figure made even taller by a ridiculous top-knot. "I do not believe we met. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Arcanist Shenathrin." Sylvanas ducked her chin so that the hat's wide brim would cover more of her face. "A pleasure, sir. I am Lady Renaria. Perhaps you know my cousin, Lady Ilana." She made up the names on the spot. It was safer than claiming to be anyone who actually existed. Shenathrin's brow furrowed, then smoothed out. "Ah, yes," he said, "Lady Ilana." Sylvanas restrained herself from smirking. "It is a warm day, Lady Renaria," the would-be suitor continued. "Might I get you a cool drink?" "That would be lovely," Sylvanas said. He bowed and threaded his way through the crowd, top-knot bobbing. The instant he turned his back, Sylvanas headed in the opposite direction. She was surprised at how many people had turned out, and was even more glad she had decided to sneak in. Lirath was brilliant, but he'd never performed before a crowd this large. He'd be so happy to. "Sylvanas!" She whirled at the sharp whisper, terrified someone had recognized her, only to see Lirath staring at her with wide blue eyes the color of the finest summer day. "Shh! Keep your voice down. What are you doing here? And in Mother's gown? You look strange." "Never mind that. What do you think I'm doing, silly? I came here to see you." Lirath sighed, but his lips threatened to betray a smile. "You're gonna get in so much trouble." "I'll be fine. When do you go on?" "In just a few minutes. I was going to get a cup of punch. My mouth is so dry." It was hard for Sylvanas not to hug him, but she refrained. "Go ahead. Don't worry." He looked at her for a long moment, and Sylvanas thought she'd never seen him so happy. "Don't get so choked up that you cannot sing," she said a bit harshly. "You could leave right now and I'll sing like the Thalassian Red Songbird," he replied. "It means a lot that you would risk this. You are my favorite sister." "You say that to all of us." "Well, yes, and it's true. It's just truer with you." Now it was Sylvanas who felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I will stay for a couple of songs, then go." "Good, I'm glad. You will be safer that way." He beamed at her, then made his way to the refreshment table. A loud snort of laughter drew her attention. A knot of 4 youths stood a few feet away, and one of them was smirking while the others laughed. All had ruddy plump cheeks and soft hands and were clad in the usual finery. One of them sneaked a sip from a flask, and they passed it around furtively till all had taken a swig. Judging from their red faces and slightly unsteady stances, the flask either was already low or had been refilled more than once. 2 of them were the colors of the House of Salinar. "No, but look at him," the smirking boy said. Sylvanas recognized him now as Aravan, one of the younger nobles. He inclined his head toward the punch table where Lirath was ladling a cup of melon juice punch. "If I tapped him on the shoulder, he would probably fall over." Sylvanas pressed her lips together, suppressing a retort, but her fists still clenched. She glanced at Lirath, who was moving back in her direction. He just had a growth spurt and now was taller than anyone except their father. He wasn't weak, his body just hadn't caught up with his height yet. Aravan wasn't done. I hear they tried to teach him how to fight and he was terrible. Absolutely useless. Lirath stopped in his tracks. But isn't his mother Ranger General? Another boy asked. Yes, that's what makes it worse. They have to be so embarrassed. Quite deliberately, Lirath squared his shoulders and strode to the front area. Sylvanas' heart thudded almost audibly in her ears as her body was taut as a bowstring. Oh, but he plays the flute, said Aravan's brother Rendris. I'm sure that will be handy in a duel. No, brother, he does not have to fight. He can just sing a tragic song about the battle. The words stung so badly because they were true. Lirath couldn't learn to fight. The child who was so coordinated he could even dance while playing the flute became clumsy when musical instruments were replaced by instruments of war. Sylvanas felt Lirath's shame and hurt wash over and through her as keenly as if it were her own. Then came the anger, hot and dangerous, and then an icy coldness settled in her chest. She took as deep a breath as she could manage with the tightly laced gown, glanced over at the laughing boys one more time to brand their images into her brain, then moved with the throng toward the pavilion. She would make them pay for the hurt they'd caused her brother, but not now. Sylvanas would do nothing further to harm Lirath's composure. She only hoped that the hateful words spewed by the vermin spawn had not disheartened little Lord's son enough to ruin his royal debut. With the skill of a tactician, she scanned her battlefield. Lorthamar smiling at a nobleman, her prey still drunkenly boasting, and with a little chuckle poor Shaynathrin, who was carrying 2 cups of punch and scanning the crowd to find her. Sylvanas took a seat in the back. In as much shadow as she could find, an easy exit nearby. She had fully intended to leave after the first few songs as she'd promised her brother, but now she had work to do. Suddenly a great cheer went up and everyone was on their feet. Prince Kael'thas! Prince Kael'thas! And there he was. Sylvanas found herself reluctantly impressed. She'd seen glimpses of him, golden hair gleaming in the sun, clad in red and gold, but never up close. Many of the nobles here were emphasizing their own importance, lifting their chins so that a disdainful glare was all the more effective. They moved gracefully, but like performers in a play, with bows too deep and arm gestures too broad. Kael'thas, son of Anasterion, heir to the throne of Quel'Thalas, did not need such tricks to command attention. He bore himself with easy elegance, smiling and nodding to those he knew and acknowledging all gathered with a sweeping glance. No one took their seat until he did, settling regally into an opulently carved gilded chair and waving a hand airily. My lords, my ladies, Selthril said, I hope you have enjoyed yourselves at one of my justly famous gatherings, as these parties are known for having only the finest food, drink, and guests. He paused, smiling benevolently as the audience tittered. They are also renowned for the finest entertainment outside the palace. I have discovered a remarkable talent in the form of young Lirath Windrunner. Yes, I see we all know the name. He is the youngest child of our beloved advisor and our Ranger General. Dancing is welcomed, smiles and applause encouraged, and I must warn you, you may discover you require a handkerchief. Lirath stepped forward to enthusiastic applause. He is thin, Sylvanas thought, and slight. Knowing of the cruelty only a few moments old, Sylvanas thought Lirath looked alone and vulnerable on stage. He bowed gracefully, lifted the flute to his lips, and began to play. After the few first hauntingly sweet notes, the crowd was his. They stopped their chit-chat, their fan-waving, and leaned forward, faces rapt. Even the boys who had said such cutting things were silent now. Sylvanas allowed herself a slow smile. No one could do what Lirath did. It was good the youths were seeing the power her brother could wield. But it wasn't going to save them. After the first song, Sylvanas stepped back into the shadows. No one was paying her any attention. She lifted the cumbersome skirts and ran back to her hawkstrider, opening the saddlebag and hoping she hadn't removed the items she sought. Her fingers closed around a small leather pouch. This will teach them to beware what words leave their mouths, she said, and patted Snap. By the time she returned, Lirath had paused for a break. Sylvanas was pleased to see that a not inconsiderable crowd had gathered around him. She regarded him fondly, then turned to her mission. There had been 5 of them. 5 who had pointed and laughed at someone they perceived as lesser, just because he had more talent and brains than muscle. 5 who had assumed that just because he couldn't fight, her little lord's son, was worthless. There were several areas where food and punch had been laid out. Sylvanas moved toward the least crowded one, checked to make sure she wasn't being observed, and began. She moved quickly, filling 5 delicate glass cups with the light green beverage. Opening the small pouch, she dropped a pinch of powder in each one, then tucked the pouch back in her bodice. It would have been easier to ask a server to give the beverages to the youth, but Sylvanas relished the task too much to surrender it to another. Setting aside the cups she had prepared, Sylvanas picked up 2 of them and went to the boys. They were flirting with 2 vapid-looking young women who gave Sylvanas a glare as she approached. She ignored it, smiling at the pair. "I saw you all from over there and thought you might like something sweet." "Thank you, milady," Aravan said. "Why, yes, we're parched." Sylvanas smiled prettily, and then, to their dismay, returned to the table, threading her way through the crowd. She came to an abrupt halt, her eyes going wide. Lord Southrill and his lady Elisara stood beside the table she'd come from. She'd only been gone a moment, but in their hands were 2 of the remaining 3 drinks. Sylvanas opened her mouth to stop them. Pompous and arrogant as he was, Southrill had been good to the family, especially Lyrath, and that went a long way with Sylvanas. When Elisara frowned and touched a gloved hand to her mouth, Sylvanas realized it was already too late. A wail went up behind her, followed by the sound of a cup crashing to the stone floor. Sylvanas whirled. Despite the direness of the situation, Sylvanas couldn't help but smile. The leader of the bullies looked like he was about to cry or faint, or perhaps both. He was trying to speak, but spittle and drool sprayed from his mouth. His swollen tongue lolled. "You sharpen your tongue at my brother's expense. Your speech will pay the price." Sylvanas turned back for one last glance at Southrill, and to her horror realized he was staring directly at her. He pointed an accusing finger and shouted a command in a furious tone. It was gibberish. Despite herself, Sylvanas snickered at how ridiculous he looked, desperately trying to utter actual words and producing only babbles. Strong hands closed around her arms, and the music abruptly ceased. Sylvanas tried to wriggle free, but these were trained guards, not annoyed partygoers, and she lowered her head as she was dragged before Southrill. He had a hand to his mouth to hide his drooling, and with effort got some slurred but intelligible words out. "What have you done? You deserve beyond Polycarpus." Don't laugh. Don't laugh. Well, I jumped forward way far. She laughed. Some other partygoers, those who had not drunk the concoction, began to laugh too. Southrill turned crimson all the way up to his long ears. "It's my fault." She, still held firmly by a guard on either side, Sylvanas whipped her head around to see Lyrath pushing his way through the crowd, pale but resolute. "I begged her to come." "My lord, that is not true," Sylvanas said. "Lyrath had no idea I would be here. Please do not blame him for my offense. It's mine, and mine alone." She had only wanted to show her brother support, but her anger with the bullies had clouded her judgment. The lord's face turned thunderous. He pointed at Lyrath, Sylvanas, and the main party entrance. With effort, he said with only the slightest slurring, "Never come back!" "My lord Southrill!" The voice belonged to Lorthamar Theron, who moved to stand beside Sylvanas. He didn't look at her. "I want to assure you that everyone will be just fine within the hour. I believe that Lady Sylvanas put some woundwood into your beverage. While it's in very poor taste, it is harmless, and I ask you that you be the better person and forgive her this childish prank. She is still very young, and Lyrath had nothing to do with this. I am sure the advisor and the Ranger General would appreciate this kindness." His smooth voice subtly emphasized the titles, and it was not lost on Southrill. The comment stung, but Sylvanas bit her lip and remained silent. Of course Lorthamar would recognize what she'd done. The Rangers always kept woundwood on hand. It sometimes made the difference between life and death. The woundwood tree was so named because its leaves, when dried and mixed with liquid, formed a numbing paste. When it was applied as a poultice, the pain was deadened temporarily, and one had time to escape to safety. Southrill drew himself up to his full height and opened his mouth. "I agree with Theron," came a clear, elegant voice. The crowd that had stymied Sylvanas' escape party parted quickly to admit their prince. "The Windrunner family has served the Sunstriders for generations. Surely what was intended as a harmless prank by a high-spirited girl can be forgiven. And," Kael'thas added with seeming lightness, "I should very much miss the boy's music. Very much." For a moment, Sylvanus thought the Lord might refuse the veiled order. Then he scowled. Turning to Lyrath, he nodded. Lyrath sighed in relief. Then Southrill turned his cold gaze on Sylvanus. "You," he said, already starting to regain control of his mouth. "Banished!" Sylvanus was escorted out. Her cheeks were red, and she was a jumble of emotions. Instead of going home, she tethered Snap to a tree and sat atop a boulder on the road back, waiting for hours until at last she saw Lyrath approaching. He reined in his hawkstrider and they regarded each other. "I ruined your debut for the prince," Sylvanus said. "That was the last thing I wanted to do." Lyrath's usually open face was closed and wary. "I know you mean that. Is everything all right now?" "Yes," he said. "The prince was extraordinarily kind." At last the smile Sylvanus so craved curved his lips ever so slightly. "He wants me to play again." "I'm so glad and so sorry." Lyrath sighed and nodded. "Well," he said lightly, "you got yourself banished, so we'll call it even." Welcoming the shift in his tone, Sylvanus attempted a smile. "It's no real loss. I would never attend his parties anyway." She untethered Snap, climbed up, and then began heading down the road to home. "I know Southrill is a bit full of himself," Lyrath said diplomatically, "but why did you put the wound in his punch?" "It wasn't meant for him. He picked up the cup by accident. I really am sorry about that, but it was funny." "Who was it for, then?" She didn't answer at once. The silence lingered, and then he said, "Oh." Sylvanus nodded. "I couldn't let stand what they said about you," she said, renewed defiance creeping into her voice, "especially since I know you heard it. That might have made you ruin your performance for the prince. It's worth getting banished to see them blubbering and drooling. They deserve that and more." "You do realize they thought they had been poisoned?" She whirled to stare at him, her shocked expression answer enough. It had never occurred to her not until this moment when he said it out loud. In retrospect, mere banishment was almost a reward. "I didn't think so," Lyrath said kindly. "But, Lady Moon, you are sometimes too single-minded. People will end up getting hurt." And that's highlighted a lot because that's a truism about her. He was right. She needed to be better about that. "I will do better," she promised him. "In the meantime, everything turned out fine. You will still get to perform, and I won't have to attend dull soirees." Sylvanus had expected a chuckle, but Lyrath fell silent. Dusk was coming, and Lyrath's face was growing harder to see. "Sylvanus," he said, and his voice sounded much older and oddly compassionate. "Do you really think that was the first time I had heard that?" Her eyes widened. "Oh, Lyrath, no! It happens every time I play. Someone always points out that I must be the disappointment of the family, that I'm too weak to be worth anything." And he paused. "What if they're right? How could he think this? How could he not know how deeply his music affected people? How his family was in awe of his skill?" "Lyrath, no, that's not true at all. Maybe I should spend more time training. I should learn how to fight, to defend myself and others who can't. Become a ranger, just like the rest of you. Saving people is much more important than just entertaining them." A shiver went through Sylvanus. The thought of Lyrath fighting a troll, being chased by a beast as Illyria had been, injured, maybe dying? No, she couldn't bear that. He had gifts she couldn't comprehend, only marvel at. His warmth and kindness were always a balm to her, to the family, to everyone who heard him sing or play, or even simply saw him smile. Lyrath had been given a gift at birth and had honed it with his own determination and passion just as she had. His was music, hers was archery. Only now when he had spoken the words did Sylvanus realize how much she wanted, no, needed him to be safe and happy, sharing his gift in a peaceful place. "Those boys are pampered fools who have nothing better to do with their time and gold than to eat, drink, and belittle others who have actual skill," she said, her voice sharp. "Pay no attention to them. Being a ranger in this household is nothing new. Being a musician and having Kael'thas himself rush to your defense, that's something special. Don't underestimate the value of what you do, Lyrath. There is more than one way to save people, and one of those ways is giving them a respite from worry and fear by offering peace and beauty. We couldn't be prouder of you." He nodded, reassured by her words. Sylvanus' tight chest eased. Hopefully this would be the only time rangering came up. That life was not suited to him, nor he to it. She grinned at him. We still have plenty to do together, even if I can't go to Southrill's parties. We Rin-Runners make our own entertainment. I'd never trade dancing or swimming with the three of you, or all the games we make up, or just, she shrugged, just being with you. But my little lord's son, you must promise me one thing. He was smiling now too, and all was right in her world. Name it. Don't get so important you don't want to play for me anymore. He laughed, a sweet sound, a bright sound. Never, Lady Moon, never. Sylvanas felt the weight of the day's events lift like a heavy pack dropped with a relieved sigh. She and Lyrath were quiet as they walked up the ramp to the spire, but it was a warm, comfortable silence, until they heard sharp words cracking like a whip, dispelling the stillness of the evening and the tranquility so recently restored. You cannot be serious. It is your birthright, Illyria. The eldest Windrunner has always become Ranger General. I don't want something given to me just because I happen to be born first. I want something I've earned. Illyria's voice rose. Sylvanas glanced at Lyrith. After all they'd been through today, this was the last thing she wanted Lyrith to endure. They moved quietly inside, intent on going to their rooms unnoticed by the arguing pair. Sylvanas glanced in that direction and saw a small figure sitting beside the cracked door. Verisa put a finger to her lips, then beckoned them over. Moving silently, the three children sat and listened as their mother and Illyria quarreled. Did you think I made your trial so difficult and dangerous because I hoped you would fail? No, of course. Then why? I wanted you to feel you were worthy. I wanted everyone to know that. Sylvanas felt her face turn red. She had hoped that her error made years ago for the best of reasons had been forgotten. Clearly not. It just doesn't feel right, Illyria said, her voice slightly quieter. Larissa sighed. It can feel intimidating at times, but do not doubt. You're born to do this. It will feel right once you step into the role. It did for me. The three siblings looked at one another confused. Did that mean that once Larissa had not wanted to be Ranger General? What you do is important, Mother. I know that. But there is a whole world out there, one you never let us see. A world full of other people, other cultures, other ideas the Quel'Dorei would do well to know about. Our kingdom would have been overrun thousands of years ago if it had not been for human aid. We taught the humans magic as thanks for their help. I would think that would cancel out any debt. Do not forget, it would have gone ill for them as well had the trolls been victorious. Let your father and the other council members deal with the world out there. The only people who should matter are right here, and they need protection. That is your task, Illyria. Please don't make me feel guilty, Mother. Illyria's voice dropped lower, even softer, and Lyrath, sitting between Sylvanas and Verisa, winced. Sylvanas realized she should have gone straight to her room, or at least made sure that Lyrath went to his. He thrived on harmony. His gifts to others went deeper than making music. It made her feel almost sick to watch him growing angry and frustrated. Not that she could blame him. Verisa picked up on it almost instantly. Our little peacemaker, Sylvanas thought. It was as if the two older siblings received all the energy and sharpness of their mother, while the younger had inherited a love of balance and peace from their father. At least it's an even number to balance it out, Sylvanas thought. It will be all right, Lyrath, Verisa whispered. They will figure out what is best. Come now, let's go to bed. Lyrath allowed himself to be led away, but he gave Sylvanas a bleak look over his shoulder that cut deep. Today should have been his day, but it had ended up being all about everyone but him. His parents called away, Sylvanas almost ruining it. Now it was all about Mother and Illyria. Sylvanas thought she should probably go to bed too. She didn't want to encounter her mother in this state and give her the news that her daughter had gotten herself banished from Southrill's parties. And yet she lingered, sitting with her back against the wall and her knees to her chest, clasping them with her arms. Sylvanas didn't mind the occasional heated argument. She'd certainly participated in or even started her share of them. But something about this one felt different. This wasn't a minor squabble. It affected the paths of two women, and really the whole family, even the Forest Riders and maybe the kingdom itself. What would happen if Illyria refused to become Ranger General? Would their mother banish Illyria as Southrill had Sylvanas? At last the voices dropped to murmurs so soft Sylvanas had to strain to hear them. Both women sounded tired. They had worn themselves out. It was time for Sylvanas to withdraw before she was caught. She took a deep breath and headed to her room. A few minutes later, with the covers pulled up to her chin, she lay on her side and looked out the window at the dark blue-black sky with scattered shining stars. She would make it up to Lirath tomorrow, she told herself. They'd go to their favorite spot with a picnic and stay till the fireflies came. A memory stirred. Lirath, 4 years old or so, piping a song as the fireflies drifted and blinked in the lavender twilight. "Look, Lady Moon," he had crowed. "Even the stars have come to dance." "If ever the stars would come to dance," Sylvanas whispered, "it would be for you, baby brother. Only for you." Oof. More foreshadowing. No, it's going to be ill. But also, I kind of felt, and maybe this is why I thought Sylvanas was older, I thought she was the Ranger General. So maybe this is leading up to like how that can amicably happen, because I don't think there's any beef between the sisters because of it. All right, we got another episode in the pipe, 5x5. You know, as always, I thank you so much for watching and for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.